with music and now with comedy, like nobody's telling me I don't have to do it. And so it's all, coming from the fact that it is just joyful to create, to play, to just live and, swim in this ocean and play in this playground. And so I'm like really grateful, for all of the steps that led to that eventually, led to right here, right now.
Yeah. Amen, brother.
Do a thing, you're doing a thing. It's fun to do the thing you're doing. Like singing, and playing, and thinging, hooray-ing. Bringing each day into night. Turning sound into light. Turning sound into light. Into light.
Hello, this is Myq Kaplan. Welcome to this episode of The Prisoner's Dilemma, where we discuss striking the balance between the passion for your art or your craft and paying the rent. I'm really excited to have Myq Kaplan here, who is a card-carrying comedian, I believe, like an official comedian. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say as much as a comedian can be official, I am one.
Yeah. When did you know that? When did you know, like, okay, I'm officially a comedian? Like,
Sure. I think the framework that you have for this podcast is actually kind of perfect for that question, or vice versa. Maybe it's not a coincidence, but I would say that I first became like aware of stand-up comedy. I'd seen Seinfeld when I was a kid. I saw people from Saturday Night Live like Norm Macdonald and Dana Carvey had stand-up specials. But other than that, I didn't really know it was a job. I thought comedian was just like a thing that famous people, sort of could become or do on the side. I didn't know there were non-famous comedians until maybe my senior year of college or thereabouts, give or take. A comedian came to my school named DJ Hazard, and I thought he was so funny. And he like touched my brain and heart in ways that I'd never laughed that hard. I was like, oh, this, and I started going to comedy shows, and I was pursuing music at the time. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. Some of my songs were funny, so I found the Comedy Studio, a comedy club in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I asked if I could perform there. I was mostly just trying to do my songs, and so I did that for a few years, just pursuing songs. Like, and I got to perform music open mics mostly, but occasionally at this comedy club until about 2002. So that was like 1999, the very first time I performed at a comedy club, and I would say I was not an official comedian by any. I was one step away from nothing like a comedian at all. And then I took the most basic of steps and performed comedy. And I do think that there is a sense in which anyone who performs at a comedy club or does an open mic or intends to be a comedian and takes action towards that goal, like, it's a spectrum, but compared to people who've never done that, you are a comedian. And, are you paying your rent from it? Probably not after your first open mic, unless it goes very well. But sure. 2002 is the year that I say that I really started pursuing comedy. And I went to, more than one venue, twice a year. And I started going to open mics most nights of the week and writing and performing, more writing than performing in the beginning, because I was just trying to, create something to perform. And so from 2002 to 2008, I was in the Boston area where I was in grad school. And going out most nights, and like, little by little, I think probably like a couple years in, I got paid, $75 to do 20 minutes of comedy. And that was the first time I ever got paid. And then like 6 months later, I got paid $100 to do, or $50 to do some other 10 or 15 minute set.
Yeah.
And
what era was that, Myq? What years were those roughly?
Yeah. So I would say, started pursuing it 2002, and I would say the first paid gig came in 2004.
Hmm.
So yeah, just like a full, 2 years of mostly open mics, and then kind of getting booked on like local showcases that didn't pay money or maybe gave you a drink or something or a meal. But yeah, then I remember that first paid gig was like in the fall of, I'm pretty sure it was 2004. And then the second one came in like the spring of 2005. And then they kind of started coming a little, less few and far between, a little closer and the
Yeah.
opposite of far between, near between. And then, so I'll cut to, and I can try to fill in the gap. 2006, I went to a comedy festival, a competition in Seattle called the Seattle International Comedy Competition.
Hmm.
And one of the other performers, one of the other competitors was Rory Scovel, who is a fantastic comedian. I'd never seen him before, never met him, but I loved him. He did very well in the competition. And he also had a manager at the time who was there. And she was producing a comedy festival in D.C., Washington,
Hmm.
D.C., the next year. And I got invited to do that. At that festival, I was on a showcase that a college booking agent saw. And I then got to be represented by this college booking agent, and like the college market for entertainers, for
Yeah.
comedians, musicians, bands, magicians, like all kinds of things. It's like, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but there's for your listeners, it's pretty like it's disproportionately lucrative, potentially.
Yeah. Oh, what do you mean?
Um,
What do you mean by that, Mike?
I mean, I guess, yeah, what I mean is, so at the time, I was sort of working my way up, through the rankings, which was, kind of hierarchical,
Hmm.
And in some ways merit based, in the Boston area. Like I feel like the old way of it going, which is still how it goes some places. When I started, it was like you do enough, you work on your craft enough, you work on your act enough until you have like 15 solid minutes. And then if you have like a tape that you can prove that you can succeed in front of an audience for 15 minutes. There were like
Okay.
local bookers that you could submit this tape to. And then I could get booked around the area to be like an opening act,
Sure.
on, let's say, a 3-person show, which would usually be an opener for like 15 minutes, a middle act for 25 or 30, and then the headliner for 45 to an hour. And that was like the working your way up that
Hmm.
hierarchy was like at least the initial, that's what it seemed like the goal was. Like, oh, to become a headliner, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And when you say tape, what do you mean? Do you mean what is that? Was that an actual tape, or is that just a term for like a sound bite or a video or something? Or
Yeah, great question.
Hmm.
So I mean, it depends where you are, where we're talking in history. Like, so certainly in the 80s, like
Yeah.
literal cassette tapes or VHS tapes. And when I started, also, I think there was a time when I did have like physical VHS tapes that I was submitting to people. Like, I think for my first times submitting to the booker for David Letterman's show, it was a man named Eddie Brill, who I saw like do a seminar. Like, he was talking on a panel at a comedy festival in like 2000, probably 2003 or 4. And he said, I try to watch every tape people send me and give people feedback. And so I believe I literally sent him like a VHS tape in the mail. Um, and like eventually, this is like the mid 2000s. And so like YouTube was barely, just coming into existence. And so
Sure.
like eventually, like now, like if you're submitting to the Tonight Show or a comedy festival or a booker, all but the most old school, like, I don't know, unless like paranoid about like, the internet, like almost everybody now you would send, a link. You have like a private YouTube link or what have you, or
Yeah.
send, a file. But yeah, at the time it was uh somewhere between a VHS tape or a little while after that, a DVDs. I was sending people like physical DVDs with my set on them. And then eventually, yeah. So tape originally literal, and then eventually metaphorical, the
Yeah.
spiritual
Yeah.
tape.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool.
and so, yeah, so I remember I'd heard about the college market where,
Hmm.
it didn't work the exact same way as like, first you work your way up to your 15 minutes, then once you have 30 minutes, then you can be in the middle and like, you do the same amount of driving, almost, a little more performing and get maybe double the money. Maybe you're getting for these initial shows $50 for, an Elks Lodge to open, $100 maybe, and this is 20 years ago, and I hope the rates have raised, but sometimes sometimes I feel like there's people who are making the same at a comedy club today that they were for the same spot in the 80s. It's
Oh, wow.
a strange, every once in a while, like 20 years ago, there's no union for comedians specifically, but
Yeah.
a guy named Ted Alexandro, a very funny comedian, with a lot of integrity, started with some other folks a comedians coalition, and like went to the comedy clubs of New York and basically said, "You've been paying us X amount." I think it was like $25 for like a weeknight set, for decades, and like inflation has gone up.
Yeah.
everything is
Hello.
different now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that did help. Like, and some things have raised since then, but it's a weird, Wild West kind of situation. But
Mm.
so to the college market though, because colleges have an activities fee, like every student, for a lot of schools, maybe pays, I don't know what percent or what amount of their tuition goes to the activities fee, but the student activities offices have this bulk of money that sometimes they use it to hire like one massive, like I think when I was at Brandeis going to school, the band Blues Traveler came and performed at Brandeis. And that was, they sold tickets, but that was also like subsidized by our student activities fee. Or like, I think Adam Sandler came and performed once as well. And that was awesome. And so, some of these comedians and bands might cost thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. But depending on the size of the school and the amount of that fund, sometimes they'll use it all for one big act a semester or a year, but sometimes some schools will be like, we have a weekly comedy series or a monthly comedy series. And instead of, paying $75,000 for one act, they'll pay, $1,000 to 75 acts over the course of the year. Maybe
Yeah.
that's like just spitballing. These are not exact numbers, but
Sure.
whereas, yeah, please.
Yeah. I'll do lectures at schools sometimes, about animation or filmmaking or whatever, and I will get what's called a memoriam,
Mhm.
which I never quite understood that term. Like, what is it? It sounds kind of morbid.
That's funny. Sometimes I've been given an honorarium as well.
Oh yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, a memoriam would be like, I'm so sorry, somebody died, and here's some money. But yeah, so sometimes an honorarium is, they're like, we can't pay you, but we do have some money for some reason somehow. Yeah.
We found some cash in our pockets, and and then and it's and it's kind of in an envelope and like slid across the table.
Don't tell anyone. Yeah, you didn't get this from me. Yeah, you want to buy some watches as well out of my trench coat. So when I got the college booking agent, there's this organization called NACA, which is the National Association of Campus Activities. That I think they're still doing it, but they were around for a while, and basically any comedian or musician or anyone who want to perform at a college can submit. You send in a tape of like 3 minutes, or now a link to a 3-minute set, and then because it's such a competitive market, I think they only have, let's say they have 20 spots, over for their each region, each festival, each convention that they do. There's probably hundreds of people submitting. And so if you are lucky enough to get them to, they'll bring you to the conference, that's the word. And then you perform in front of what could be anywhere, a few dozen or up to maybe 100 schools in the area sort of converge on this conference and then potentially do their booking for the semester or the year. And so if you have a good performance, then you can get, a lot of gigs that, if I was getting paid like $100 to do a half hour, like
Yeah.
now I was getting potentially 10 times that or more, for an hour. And sometimes you would get lined up like blocks of performing,
Mhm.
where you're like, okay, these 5 schools in Pennsylvania want to have you on Monday through Friday of this week. And sometimes they'd get a deal if like 5 schools go in, then, if you were, let's say you were getting $2,000 for a single date, maybe if you get 3 in a row, then everyone would only have to pay you $1,800. Or if you got 5 in a row, everyone would only pay you $1,500. So you're, but you're still making a good amount of money for the week.
Sure.
And so compare that to, the little, the crumbs of, building up, like just in the local Boston scene where I was like, okay, now I'm getting $25. Now I'm getting $50.
Mhm,
Now I'm getting $100. And, eventually when you're a headliner in Boston, like sort of the local scene was, the headliners from the 80s were still there and hadn't left. So there weren't like a lot of spots to like move up. So a lot of people, after you've been doing comedy for a while in Boston or pretty much in any like small town that's not, and Boston's not a small town, but any city that's not New York or LA, like eventually a comedian might move to New York or LA and then continue to sort of strive to grow then. So to answer your question, by 2008,
what was the question again?
Yeah, when did I become an official comedian?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think it was somewhere in the middle of this explanation.
Ah.
It was definitely in 2008. I moved from Boston to New York. I graduated with my graduate degree from Boston University, and where I had been living as a resident assistant. So I'd been getting housing for free in exchange for, the job that I was doing. I'd also been at times working as a barista at a Barnes & Noble cafe. I'd been working since I was studying linguistics at the speech and language department of a technology company in the area. And once 2007, 2008, I got my college booking agent, I think in 2007, and they started submitting me to these NACAs, these conferences. I did very well at the first 1 or 2 of them, to the point that I think maybe I booked like 20 schools. And I was like, that's, more money than I would make in like months of working. And so that combined with the money that I was making, from the smaller local gigs, driving around to New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, I was like, I was optimistic that if I could continue to grow, to maintain this and or grow, like then maybe I don't need to have a full-time job anymore. And so when I moved from Boston to New York, when I graduated from grad school, I stopped doing all of the other jobs that weren't specifically stand-up comedy. And so I would say 2008 is the year that I became a full-time professional comedian, or in terms of this conversation and your question's purview, an official comedian.
Official.
Yeah.
Rubber stamp. Official. So let's talk about the craft a little bit. And you said you majored in linguistics, and then I love the timing of your shows, that you zoom ahead and then kind of go back and zoom ahead and go back because you're so quick. And music, which I can hear in the theme song to your podcast, Broccoli and Ice Cream. It sounds like that's some sophisticated, it's fun and simple, but I hear some sophistication in there, like some harmony even.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I figured, okay, wow, you have some musical background. So taking those 3 things, like, linguistics, music, comedy, and the rhythms of those, and how you use that to communicate, is super interesting to me. I mean, I do story work for animation and film, and I'm just constantly studying the timing, broad stroke timing, like you have certain parameters to tell a story, or a show, to, like what affects people emotionally, and it seems like there's some commonality in the way we speak, linguistics, music, and just the rhythms of comedy. And I don't want to get too far ahead, but I've heard that a lot of communication, because of the way you speak, whether you use more vowels in your language or more consonants, it affects like the way your theater is and the way your comedy is, and things like that. Which always, I thought that, okay, totally, that's something cultural that's going to affect the way you're entertained. What do you think about that, Mike?
Yeah, sure. First, thank you for asking. Thank you for the kind words.
Hmm.
And I will say, first, I went to a Chuck Jones exhibit once at, I think, like the Museum of Radio and Television in New York. And, I remember seeing a very specific, like, video, an animation of like the Wile E. Coyote, like, sort of falling, and we see from, a bird's eye view, like he's getting smaller and smaller and he disappears, and then there's like a puff of smoke, like, from when or dust when he hits the ground.
Yeah.
And I remember them saying that there was like the exact number of frames, like between the time that he disappeared and when the puff of smoke appeared, like, was so precise that I think it was something like, I don't know if it was like 13 frames.
Yeah.
And they were like, if you did it 12 frames or 14 frames, it would have been like off. It would have been like an uncanny valley. People would have been like, that's weird. Like, why didn't it happen yet? Or that it happened too soon. And so I feel like, I don't know if that has to do with, I mean, like, it certainly pertains to timing and these grander questions of, like, for comedy, like, let me here's another, I don't know if you've heard this, that Seinfeld will sometimes talk about. There was like a famous interview he did where he talked about a comedian basically is for the setup of a joke, you're getting the audience to leap off a cliff. Lot of gravity involved here. And you get them to leap off, and the punchline is where you get them to land at the other side. Like, and if that's too far, they don't make it. If the punchline's too far away, or if it's too close, it's not exciting. So it similarly has to be the exact right, kind of like what the Buddhists would call maybe the middle path, like, can't be not too far, not too close, or Goldilocks, just right. And so I think that, for me personally, like in my comedy, when I started out, I was mostly doing one-liners, and I feel like the timing involved in, when what the punch, certainly what the punchline is matters, but when it comes and how it's expressed. And like, I have often been somebody who speaks, I've been given the note to slow down, and I understand that, and I'm also, I want to say, not incapable of it, but I have learned, I've just discovered who I am, and every person has sort of like their, the natural timbre of their voice, and the natural, cadence of their speech, and the natural, speed. And of course, I can, like, there's, you listen to like a rapper like Eminem sometimes, and like, I will need to be like looking at the lyrics to catch everything. Or there's a rapper named George Watsky, who also, like, his first viral video was called Pale Kid Raps Fast. And like, if the words aren't there, so I get that, different people have their natural tendencies for both producing and receiving. And then also people have different tastes in, like, let's say in music. Some people might like much more sort of a calm, relaxing, ethereal, like bunch of whole notes, bunch of like, but some people might like, super, super fast, intricate, jazz or like just a lot of, some people like syncopation, like obviously, and these are not just like, one person likes this, one person likes that. Many people can like many things, but I feel like definitely the connections that you're pointing to are real. And so I'll go back even further. My parents were music teachers when I started my life. For most of my childhood, my dad was a high school band director. My mom was an elementary school music teacher. My dad taught private lessons in our home also. My mom would eventually do that as well. And so I started taking violin lessons when I was 4. And so music was like one of my first languages. I think it was just, all around me, and I was being taught it and I was playing it. And so I think that because of that, my like entry point into comedy also, like, obviously, like the things that I say are important. And also like the form and the function are both important. Like, but it's interesting because when I listen to music, like one of the first like cassette tapes I ever bought when I was probably like 12, 13, somewhere there, was Cypress Hill Black Sunday, which had like Insane in the Membrane on it. And I remember listening, like memorizing lots of those lyrics and just like singing along with those songs without even knowing what the words that I was saying meant. Like years later, I'd be like, oh, these are, like, guns and drugs. Perfect. But as a kid, I was just like, the sound of his voice was just so like catchy and intoxicating, and it's just like fun to hear and fun to do. Like, it's just like, he like really created a thing. And so I feel like in some, like, I definitely have like some jokes where like the way that I'm saying whatever I'm saying is more important than the thing that I'm saying. The thing that I'm saying might be nonsense, but and I feel like sort of like inhaling and exhaling, sense and nonsense. Or like sometimes when I have endeavored to freestyle rap, which, coming up with like the two things that you want to do in freestyle rapping or in rapping in general are usually rhyming is one, and saying something meaningful is the other. Like, a freestyle rap isn't usually just like cat, hat, bat, fat, mat, slat. It's like that's the rhyming part. But if you have that without the meaningful part, then it's not quite what your prototypical rap. But if you only have meaning without rhyme, then that's prose more than rap. And so you need some combination. So like when I have endeavored to freestyle rap, I will usually start by maybe saying something that is meaningful, and then be like, well, now I have to rhyme with this. And then I do something that rhymes with it. And if it makes sense, wonderful. If it doesn't make sense, then I'll spend the next line trying to make sense of it. Then once I've made sense of it, then I'll be like, oh, got to rhyme again. And then ideally, these things are happening simultaneously. And so I feel like similarly with my comedy, like there's some equivalent to that, some parallel where I want to say something that is meaningful, interesting, like personal, true, unique, like something that I care about, something that I think is important to say. And then also I want it to be funny. Like, so sometimes I might start with a funny thing and be like, does this mean anything? And then I'll try to create meaning around it. Sometimes I'll start with something meaningful and try to create something, what's funny about this? And sometimes it starts as both, and sometimes it starts as neither. And when I started, more than 20 years ago, and like back in, let's say 2002, when I was writing jokes, I was much more focused on what was funny. I'm like, is this funny? Is that funny? And I would just write 1,000 things. So, I mean, to your point of the craft of it, for me, it was just like, volume was, quantity was where I was coming from. I was like, I know that I don't know what I'm doing. And so like, is this something? Like I sometimes put it like this. I was more in the beginning asking jokes than telling jokes. And so I'd say, audience, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? Give them 30 things.
Are you doing that because that was the one thing that I found fascinating too, when I heard someone talking about, wish I could remember who it was. It's kind of similarity to animation or filmmaking where people see the finished project and they're like, this is great. I love this, and not realizing it took 4 years to kind of go through this exercise of storyboarding the thing and seeing what worked and throwing stuff away and all that stuff. And so when I first learned that some comedians do that as well, you're doing your rough shows, and seeing how the material works. Like you said, asking questions of the audience, kind of like, is this working? Is this working? And then refining from there. Um, I think that's an awesome part of the craft, and that's the broccoli of the craft, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Like for example, a few nights ago, like Thursday of last week, there's a club in New York, in Queens called QED,
Hmm.
and I've been going there. I think they've been there for about 10 years, and I have been, doing shows there for a while. And I would say every few months, I will book an evening there where the whole show is me, and I'm going through like my notebook, where I've I brought my notebook and I had written like about like 28 jokes that I had either not tried at all yet, or I had tried like only, minimal amounts of time. Like these are like newer ideas that I was like excited about. I'm like, they're funny to me. I know there's something about them. And I would just go to the audience, and the way that I do it, I was just like, there's probably like a dozen people there. It's just a small, like an intimate gathering of people who really wanted to be there. And I just went around and met the people and then offered them all an opportunity to pick what jokes I would tell. So I'm like, go to this table and say, "Oh, your name is Levi. Levi, what would you like a joke about?" And I would give them like 5 options, and then he'd be like, "I'd like that one," and then I would try that joke. And sometimes it would also lead me to other ones or other ideas, and I would also, sort of just see what arose in the moment. And then by the end of the, I think, hour and 20 minutes, I think I'd gone through maybe only half the jokes, but I had, then an hour and 20 minutes worth of fun to go back through. And like on a drive a few days later, I listened to that hour and 20 minutes, and I'm like, I took notes of, oh, what worked the way I wanted to, what worked in a surprising way that I didn't expect, what could work better. You win some, you learn some. And
I'm sorry, Mike.
yeah,
What was the room that you were first operating to get to this?
this show was happening in QED.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's, it's not the only place that I'll go to, sort of workshop new things, but it's one of many places that I feel like comfortable experimenting. And so that's like going back, for any comedian who's starting out or anywhere, like any comedian at any level needs like some place that's either their open mic or their laboratory, or some place where you're free to try something that you've never said before, that you've never tried before. Um, and, for some people, it's literal open mics. For some, gigantic comedians, they can stop into, the Comedy Cellar in New York City, one of the most prestigious comedy clubs in the world. And, like if you're Seinfeld, you can be like, oh, maybe I'll just stop in there and try these new jokes from my pad that I wrote this morning.
Right.
And so we all need a place like that. And yeah, so that's basically, I mean, for myself, when I started, it was just, I wrote thousands of jokes, and I would go to an open mic and get 5 minutes and try 30 of the jokes. And if they worked, I would, jot that down. If they didn't work, I would try to tweak them for the next time or replace them with another joke, because there was, a long line of jokes to keep trying.
Yeah.
And yeah, then eventually I got to a place like, and I remember reading an interview with Emo Phillips once, who is one of my, comedy heroes. I think he's a fantastic genius. And I think this is my memory of this question, that somebody asked him, do you think that over your many decades of doing comedy, you have gotten better at, writing jokes, something like that?
Mhm.
And he said, no. He said, the thing that I do think I've gotten better at is figuring out which of the ideas that I've come up with are likely to succeed, are likely to be jokes that, that the audience responds to.
Sure.
And like Stephen Wright said a thing once that sort of I think relates to this as well. He says like he would always try a new joke 3 times, and if it didn't work any of those times, he didn't think it wasn't funny. He just thought that the audience didn't agree with him. And I like that because I mean there are definitely, when I was starting out, like the things that I would write down or the ideas that I would record, like I was like anything, grasping at anything. I'm like, is this something like in fact, I think Seinfeld put out a book of his jokes, like, and his ideas, like decade by decade from like the 70s on. And I think he called the book "Is This Anything?"
Hmm.
Because that's like, a classic comedian question. You might ask your friend, be like, "Is this anything? Like something about this?" And then I think it's also funny that I think it was Gilda Radner who wrote a book called "It's Always Something." And so I think it's fun to have those books side by side. Is this anything? It's always something.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I kind of want to also just go back and button off part of the last question, which was the connection of music and comedy and linguistics, which I mean, I think linguistics is just the study of languages. I mean, that is so I think that for myself, my interest in linguistics, my interest in, semantics and syntax and like phonetics and phonology, like both the sounds and meanings of words and sentences and ideas, again, like the form and function of communication. That is, I mean, essentially what is going on with comedy as well. Like some jokes might be like unspoken. Like you can have physical comedy that involves no speaking at all, but I'd say most stand-up comedy involves speaking. And so there's the thing that you're saying, and then there's how you're saying it. And the how you're saying it is the thing that I think is connected to music, the musicality of it. Like the way in which, a Mitch Hedberg joke could make someone laugh, even if the content of the joke isn't the most, the funniest thing that you've ever heard, which I mean, he's one of my favorites, but also just his voice. I feel like there's so many comedians that like, you speak about developing your voice metaphorically, but then some comedians like have a voice that they've either developed or just were born with, like literally. Like Mitch Hedberg's voice, the way he delivers his comedy is infectious and just so like calming. And like Paul F. Tompkins is another favorite of mine. And like when I listen to him a long time, then like I start to have fun, like swimming in the ocean of his cadence and the way that things come out. And anyway, as a comedian, sometimes I know there are comedians who like don't listen to comedians who are too close, because if you listen to them, I remember hearing Pete Holmes talk about Brian Regan, who he's like, I love Brian Regan, but I can't listen to him too much, because if I listen to him too much, then I start to, get pulled into the gravitational field of his cadence and delivery. And we all, want, I think, strive to be as uniquely ourselves as possible. So, I feel like, I think Mike Birbiglia told me once also that he didn't watch any comedians really. And I don't know if that's true anymore, but this is like 20 years ago. He said, I don't watch any comedians except for, I think he said, Chris Rock and Richard Pryor. Like, in part because he loved them, and also because he didn't feel like he was in danger of accidentally becoming them. Like nobody would be like, hey, Mike Birbiglia, have you been watching too much Chris Rock? Because your newest special is very much, in his vein.
Yeah.
So I do think that every comedian is essentially like, when you start out, you are like, compared to when you're learning music. When I learned the violin, like my mom gave me a violin. I was holding a violin and like, okay, this is my instrument. And then you can look at the music and you're like, okay, twinkle, twinkle. That's how that goes. And you're learning how to play music that exists on an instrument that exists. As a comedian, you are the instrument, and it doesn't exist until you create it. So you are both creating the instrument, writing the music that didn't exist yet, and like learning how to play it. Sometimes people talk about doing an improv scene as you're building the plane as you're also flying it. And so it's sort of like that, but I really feel like it's in a almost literal sense, we are creating the instrument of our comedy. We are composing the music of it. We are creating the genre that is us. Like, obviously, there are some established genres. If you're like, I want to be a monologue writer, or I want to be a political comedian, or I want to be an absurdist, or a storyteller, or, or do a character. But ultimately, I think, the greatest comedians are uniquely themselves. Like, no one is like Maria Bamford except for Maria Bamford. Like, no one is like Gary Goldman except for Gary Goldman.
Yeah.
And so I think that in that kind of literal and metaphorical and spiritual sense, like, literal music was one of my first languages. And so then I think that when I first started doing comedy, it made sense that, as a young 20-something, man in our society who had, we all have stories to tell, but also back then I feel like I had much less of import to say. I didn't know what I had to say that was important because, I hadn't lived as much. I had a fairly sheltered childhood. I had had some interesting things happen to me, like some painful things happen, various, like my parents divorcing, my like moving and having to start over and like not being comfortable, socially.
But when was that? When was that, Myq?
Sure. When I was 12 or 13, like right before 8th grade, my family moved. And then like a year or two later, my parents divorced. So that was like right around like when puberty was starting. I had to start over in a new school with kids that I didn't know, and I'd never really had to.
Okay. I knew there was something simpatico because, so my parents split up when I was 12, which I think supposedly is like the worst age. I'm not, I can't judge the situation looking back on it, but it did. I don't know. It was formative. It was formative, and like being a stranger in a strange land and trying to find allies, and gravitating towards either being the class clown or finding the class clown and I'm not sure like why that was, like why if that was because of this like turbulent era in the parents splitting up.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I also don't know, but that certainly makes sense. That, I mean, a great human need, and certainly as a child especially, is communion and community and security, and to a feeling, a desire, a need to be loved and taken care of, especially as a child. And yeah, I think that comedy is something that can connect people. Like, when you're laughing, you're not usually like fearful. You're not sad in that moment. You're maybe not scared. Maybe you are. Maybe you can. Oh, God. But for me, I was also very fortunate that at the same time I had, my school life was very challenging. My home life was also, undergoing this upheaval. But my summer camp life, over the summers, I had just started going to this place called Bucks Rock, which is a performing and creative arts camp in Connecticut. And it was like my home. It became,
that sounds fun.
Like, oh, it was magical.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they have all these, incredible different artistic opportunities. But for me, like, the thing that was, I mean, life-saving or certainly life-changing was that it was basically the story that I tell about it is that, I mean, I felt like this kind of misfit, this, in my school life, this weirdo, this outcast. And I know a lot of kids feel like that. And thankfully, a lot of those kids came to my summer camp. And so it was like this summer camp full
That's it. So it's that feeling of being a weirdo. You want to find the other weirdos, and then and there's
Absolutely.
the other weirdos were the ones that were kind of outside of society or just didn't quite know how to fit in because of whatever. And yeah, so finding the people that had keen observation about, or similar to what you had about, being in school and having to go through all these kind of like mundane things for some relief, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I remember like very specifically this kid in one of my bunks when I was 13. His name was Ari, and he was just like I'd known him for a year or two. We weren't super close, but he just kind of made himself my friend. He like kind of invited me. We just like, I don't know, played ping pong together and like made up weird things. And then he had like a larger group of friends that he was basically just like, come here, like hang out with all of us. And like there was like one particular, shop, the publications shop where you could, there was like a literary magazine and like the camp yearbook you could work on, writing and art and layout and, and just there was like this garden area that a lot of these kids just hung out in. And I'd never been just like it felt just warm to be invited, to be included. And then like some of those kids, from 30 years ago are like still some of my best friends today. Like, I mean, I've
Awesome.
made other friends in the intervening years, but like that place and that environment was like it really helped me understand that there were other like kind, loving, compassionate beings, that it wasn't just like kids in school who were all, like nobody, very few people liked being in school. So I feel like it was a skewed sample of humanity. Like high school is not commensurate with, doesn't correlate to the way life and humanity is or need be. And I mean, neither was the summer camp, but I think the summer camp environment was like at its best, like when you're given what you need, when you have enough food and shelter and water and caring people around you. And so that was something where, and it was the first place my friend Ari his guitar was the first guitar I ever picked up. And that's what I, started playing. And that's what led me to want to be a musician and a singer songwriter. And that's what led me to comedy. And,
Hmm.
and I made music with some other friends there. And yeah, so that was like, I think where even though, my mom and dad had like, started me on the violin when I was 4 and really wanted me to love music. And I didn't really get it until I started like planting the seed myself of, of teaching myself guitar and being like, I'm doing because I want to, because I choose to, because it's fun and I don't have to. And I just played for hours a day. And it's just, I mean, music is one of the most magical, beautiful things. But when it was like a class that I had to take, I couldn't get around that. I couldn't see that. But now, with music and now with comedy, like nobody's telling me I don't have to do it. And so it's all, coming from the fact that it is just joyful to create, to play, to just live and, swim in this ocean and play in this playground. And so I'm like really grateful, for all of the steps that led to that eventually, led to right here, right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Amen, brother.
Thank you.
So did you have a band that you played on stage with?
Kind
That
of.
kind of.
So my friend Sam, another, kid I met when like I was probably 15 and he was 13, something like that. And one of the kids in this group that I, became tight with at summer camp in the 90s. He also was a musician, and so we sang in the chorus together there and in like the camp a cappella group. And then he wrote his own songs and I wrote my own songs, and we started like playing our own songs together. And then he also had some like recording equipment, and so we started like we recorded, an album. I think the first album we made, like we were like 17 or 18, and it was like a cassette tape that we just like stayed up like dubbing ourselves all night. And like then a year later we made one, and CD technology existed, so we started burning CDs. And in the meantime, so I don't know if two people count as a band. We called ourselves sometimes just Mike and Sam or Sam and Mike, but I had one song that I wrote that the song was called My Grandfather Was a Spy. And then we named our first album, maybe My Grandfather Was a Spy. And then we're like, oh, maybe our band name is My Grandfather Was a Spy, whatever the case is. But we mostly played, like we didn't live in the same place like in the school year, but at camp, we would play on stage at like talent shows or like if they had a coffee house night. So yeah, it wasn't like something that, we pursued as a vocation. It was just like, for fun in front of our friends, we did. And then probably like a decade later, in like 2005, I met a comedian named Myq Kaplan, who's also one of my best friends to this day. And we were both doing comedy in Boston, and he was hosting a show, and he asked me, he's like, hey, do you want to write some songs? I know you write songs. Want to write some comedy songs, and we'll play them at the show. And we started writing songs together, and it was just so, number one, it was just so fun to just hang out with Micah, who's one of the funniest people that I've ever known and one of the nicest guys. And so just to hang out with him for an hour, a couple hours, and just like one of us would come up with a silly idea and then the other one would be like, yeah, that's a song. And we just like write ridiculous songs and we would play them around the Boston area. And we hosted a show together weekly for a year or so. And then we both moved to New York and did it there. And at one point, like we recorded an album, but it's like it's so interesting. Like Bucks Rock, the camp that I went to, the idea of it, behind like the artistic, like sort of, doctrine was like process over product. Like, of course, you come away with, you could record a CD, you could get a video of your, theatrical performance. If you're creating something out of wood or clay or sewing, you have a physical product as well, but the process, like the actual creation of it, the creating was like that was the focus. And so I feel like for me with Micah, with those songs, like it was great to have a song and it was great to share it with people, and it was great to, there's still people to this day that are like, I still like have that album and I play that song and I sing that song, and that's really meaningful that like people have responded that way. And also like the birth of it all, like the core, the heart of the experience was like just the joy of creation, the joy of playing with my friend or, in doing stand up when it's me, writing and like playing with my own ideas and then bringing them to an audience. And like, I love planning for jokes that I'm telling, but also some of the most magical moments are when something happens that never happened before, and then something is built on that, and then maybe it only exists once and never again, or maybe I can, capture that lightning and, sell those bottles next week as well. But yeah, ultimately, like even as human beings, like we think that we're like, we're like, oh yeah, there's solid, there's liquid, there's gas. We're solid, we've got liquids flowing through us, but also, every piece of matter, zoom in far enough and it's an atom, like, which is, a nucleus with like electrons spinning around it. And you can't like be like, okay, so where am I? What am I? Like, I'm made of these, particles that are flying around and switching places all the time. And there's no one, you can't like point at, be like, okay, here's me. So I feel like it's even for our very existence, it's process over product because our existence is a process. So I think that the artistic process is just, ideally one of like aligning our, our human process, like our being with like the doing of whether it's music, whether it's comedy, whether it's drawing, whatever way the art comes out, like it's the process of creating it that is like the most, sort of human and connected thing like that we can do.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that, I was in a band in college with some buddies of mine. We played alt rock and some covers, like the Smiths and the Cure and things like that. And there would be more. We play with some people that were more conventional, which was fine. So we would learn how to play Jimi Hendrix, um, Hey Joe. Uh, but to add something, it's this is an example of the creative process that has to be done. Like this um, trying to put so my mashup of I had a girlfriend that said I my voice sounded like Bullwinkle from Rocky and Bullwinkle. So the condition to play and just like an overly played um Jimi Hendrix song is okay, but I get to sing it as Bullwinkle. And we had the instrumentation down. We had the amps to make it loud enough and everything. But it was so fun to like hey Rocky, how you going with that gun in your hand? And the best part was that there's just the perfect space gap at the end of it, um, where I can't remember where it is in the song, but there's a gap in the music where I could say, "Excuse me, Rocky, while I kiss the sky," and just to see people's looks of confusion and like, what is he
Sure.
doing? And like maybe two people in the audience got it. I'm like,
Fun.
but yeah, it was worth it because that's the creative payoff. It worked just a tiny bit, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, I feel like you've sort of pointed to something that, and I think again, maybe this will like full circle with the concept of this show that you're talking about. Like, I think that, before we can ever get paid to do anything, like you mentioned the creative payoff, like that has to come first. Uh, and the thing that comes first is like from within us, like
Yeah,
whether it's an idea for a joke, a thing we think is funny, or a melody, or if it's a song, or an image, if it's a drawing, like whatever it is, there's something like that we either notice about the world or about ourselves, or that we are creating or curating, and we're putting it out there. And then, over the course of, whether if you're a comedian, you're doing it like in live in real time with an audience or with audiences over the course of days, weeks, months, years. Or if you're a visual artist, you're maybe at home, like drawing, all of your open mic drawings that don't have to make it into the world, that eventually you get to you're like, this is the finished product. Or, you don't have to entertain people or frighten people with your violin non-skills until you can sound horrible squeaking in the basement until you're like, now it sounds the way that I want it to, and you bring it to people. But it all starts with something in us that then we go out there and then offer it to an audience, and then hopefully they agree, or the couple people that agree, you're like, okay, well then those people are in my fan base. And if like two people liked it today and two people like it tomorrow, and I do a show every night for a year, well then that's 700 something people. And now I do that every year, then I got a few thousand people, and then hopefully they tell people, and it can grow and grow. And then hopefully eventually people are like, yes, I will give you money for this thing that you are providing, which is of value, because it's you've worked on it, because you care about it so much. It is you work on your craft and you hone it, and then it becomes something of value to you, and then it can become something of of literal financial value to someone else, hopefully. Or even if it doesn't, I talk about this every once in a while in this kind of conversation. My friend Sarah Benincasa is an author and a comedian and a storyteller and an actor and more. And she wrote a book called Real Artists Have Day Jobs.
Hmm.
And it's basically about, that there's an essay with that title. And because I remember, like, back to the beginning, my goal when I started in 2002, and I'm like, I want to be a comedian. I want to be a full-time comedian. I want to be a professional, official comedian. And that means I want my money to come from comedy, but that can't be like money can't be the only goal, because then you might be like, okay, well, what if I just live in my car? Then I don't have to pay rent. And then as long as I make enough for food, then I'm a comedian. I'm like, you can do that. And there are people who do that. People are like, oh, I don't have a home. I live on the road. I just go place to place. I don't think that's the best way to start being a comedian. Like, I think like Sarah's message of real artists have day jobs is like, I'm grateful that I was able to live and work as a resident assistant at BU for long enough, and to work as a barista and work at the linguistics department of this technology company, and to work as a summer camp counselor, teaching music and doing comedy workshops and doing enough things that I could, pay my rent and buy food so that, I could go and hone the craft and then keep doing the thing that I love at night until the time came when the thing that I could do that I loved was also something that could pay the rent. A joke I tell sometimes is like, my dad, when he first found out, when I told him I was going to do comedy, that was my goal that I was pursuing, he was concerned. He was like, well, how will you pay rent? How will you support yourself? How will you be able to buy food? A reasonable dad worry. And, I told him my plan, and that I was going to be obviously continuing to make money in some way, that I could, until I was able to do it another way. And so initially he was skeptical, but I always say, like, he eventually really started supporting me when he realized that he wouldn't have to really be supporting me. That he finally saw that I was able to support myself doing comedy, and then he started supporting me.
Yeah. Congratulations, man.
Oh, thank you.
But going back, what was it that DJ Hazard said, or like, what was it that captivated you?
Sure. So compared to the other comedians, I'd never seen. I that's not true. I'd seen one comedian that I know of live before that, or two actually. When I was a kid, we went to the Catskills on vacation, and I saw Henny Youngman perform when I was like 10, give or take a couple years or something. And I understand that he was like one of the biggest comedians of his day. He was like a super famous old, Borscht Belt Catskill comedian, but he didn't really speak to me as a child. Then I saw a bunch of comedians like on TV, and I saw Paul Reiser for the first time when I was 13, his special, and I loved it, and I love him. And even though I was a child and he was a grown man speaking about his life as a married man and a new homeowner, and like, still, he was so funny to me.
Does he play the bad guy in Aliens? Is that
he
Paul?
does. He is.
Okay.
Yeah, he was in Aliens. He plays the father of the main guy in Whiplash. He's been in a lot of things. He's doing great. And then my senior prom, I remember afterwards we got bussed into New York City. I grew up in New Jersey. We got bussed to Caroline's Comedy Club, and we saw like an after prom show. And I don't remember any of it or any of the comedians or anything that happened, but for whatever reason, like when I was ready, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Like, when I was 19, 20, whatever it was, and DJ Hazard came to Brandeis and performed in our tiny coffee house that seats like 50 people, and there's probably like fewer than 20 people there. I think it was like just like big comfy chairs, and I was just like sitting in this chair and like just crying, because number one, live comedy is almost always going to be like more powerful than like video, than, when it's through some technology. And I absolutely can laugh hysterically at a hilarious comedian on, watching on Netflix, but that same comedian, that same material live, there's something more magical, more powerful about, you know, being in it's a live art form and being in there with nothing intervening. That's the way to do it. And so I didn't know that, but and DJ Hazard is just like so funny. And he was saying things that, like, if I said the things to you, like, it might not translate, but they were things that, like, I had never seen comedy that was like spoke to me. That, like, you know, this is probably a horrible example, but, like, you know, there are people out there, you know, like I'm a straight white cisgender able-bodied male. A lot of media and culture has been made for me by people who are also like those demographics. Like, and so when I remember seeing like Kumail Nanjiani, who is a fantastic comedian and actor, I remember seeing him in an interview talk about maybe Rogue One, like one of the Star Wars movies that came out more recently, and that there was like a planet full of people who were, you know, brown skinned like him, and that they weren't the villains. And he's like, that's something that hadn't happened like a lot when he was growing up. You know, he was like, if there were people that looked like me, they were often, you know, the terrorists or what have you. And so the idea that, you know, representation is important, you know, is so valuable. Like, for, you know, there's like, it's wonderful that today, like, young, like, trans kids can see like lots of different options of trans people in media, in culture, that queer kids have options, that, you know, children, you know, of color, that of every, you know, there's so much more than just like, you know, when I was growing up, it was like 3 channels and mostly white people, mostly male protagonists, like mostly like straight, you know, until, you know, Ellen and Will and Grace. And even then there was only like, okay, that's the one show that does this. Like, and now there's like just a cornucopia, you know, and obviously society still needs, there's progress on its way. But, and this is all to say, like, those are a much larger scope and much more important than the analogy that I'm making. I'm not saying that this is the same in any way, but there's the smallest fraction of my understanding what that could be like. When I saw DJ Hazard and he said things that I'm like, I have thought that. I have been there. I have experienced like literally what this person is talking about, is joking about, is like identifying things that I've seen in the world and didn't think to like make a joke about or know there could be something funny about it. But he's like, you know, I feel like it wouldn't do justice to try to, you know, recreate any of the specific jokes, but it was just like, I was just like, yeah, like almost as simple as like a Seinfeldian, like, have you ever noticed this? And I was just like, yes. Oh my, like, I have noticed. There's a comedian, a friend of mine who I think is one of the funniest people, named Joe Firestone. And she has a bit that she does sometimes where she's just like, I'm going to say a thing. And if you have been there, just everyone out loud say, I have been there. And she would just say a thing. And then people would be like, I have been there. And this is, you know, this group communal catharsis.
Sure.
And that was what it was like when I first saw DJ. I was like, I have been there. Like, I thought comedy was only for, you know, older people. I mean, he was older than me, but I thought it was only for older people I didn't understand. I thought they were for like adults or teachers, or like, I thought it, you know, whatever it was, for famous people, for people different. I thought it was for people different than me, but I was like, oh, comedy is for me. This comedy is for me. And like, there can be comedy for anyone. There can be art for anyone. And, you know, I'm very glad that there are people, you know, of all demographics, of all walks of life, making art that, you know, that everybody can experience. Obviously, you know, art, like, everyone likes what they like. And I ran out of question answered. The end.
Yeah. No, he connected with you at a gut level, and like a speaking of those shows, I would try. One of the things that kept my mind active was making fun of the shows that my sisters would watch, and most of the shows were, at some point in the show, I could yell out Caucasians in crisis, because there, it was always the scene. I was it was such a standard. Um,
Yeah, that's very funny.
yeah.
I like that a lot. If you were to do stand up, I'd say that's a funny bit to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I try. I love you know, when I'm doing lectures, to try and get the people watching to, laugh one or two times. That's the goal. And so I'm taking notes.
Got it. Well, that's a noble goal. And if I may suggest, try to make, hope to make people laugh 1,000 times, and then maybe you'll get one or two.
Yeah.
Aim,
Oh,
aim
yeah, yeah.
high. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, that's yeah, and I don't know. We should probably wrap this up pretty soon, but I mean, one other thing I wanted to bring up, so I love that immediate response, that you get when you're talking to people, and that to me was a huge learning experience, or revelation, when I realized, okay, it's a lot about is reading the room, and when you're pitching, when you're talking to people or you're pitching a sequence in a film, if you're not noting how people are responding, you're not doing what you need to do. Uh, and the difference, it must be great. It is great to get that immediate response. Wherein, if you're doing an animated film, these jokes or these situations that you're crafting, you won't really know until like years later.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but
That's fascinating.
yeah, but so maybe we'll save that discussion for this. This is cool because now if we have time, Mike,
Oh, yeah.
you're going to interview me on broccoli and ice cream.
Absolutely.
Cool.